At my mother-in-law's anniversary, there was no room for me. At my mother-in-law's Parisian anniversary gala, there was no seat for me. My husband laughed. "Oh, sweetheart, nobody actually invited you." I just smiled, "Perfect, darling," and walked out. 20 minutes later, they were calling in hysterics because I'd cancelled the entire banquet. Hello, everyone. Before we begin, let us know where you're listening from, if you're subscribed to the channel, and if you've liked this video. Enjoy the story. I sat in the taxi watching raindrops trace paths down the window. The Eiffel Tower glowed in the distance like an oversized Christmas ornament, as distant and unreal as my marriage had become 15 minutes ago. My phone vibrated incessantly. 23 missed calls. Mother-in-law, father-in-law, sister-in-law, and of course, Anton, especially Anton. 12 calls in the last 10 minutes. I silenced it and dropped it into my Chanel clutch, the little black bag my husband gave me for our anniversary. "So you'd fit in," he'd said back then. Or maybe it was just a preemptive bribe for what he was planning. "Madame, where to?" the driver asked with a thick Parisian accent. An older Arab man with kind eyes met my gaze in the rearview mirror. "Are you all right?" "The Ritz, please," I replied in fluent French, mentally thanking my mother for insisting on that language immersion school years ago. Yes, I was all right. Strangely, I truly was. Like the final drop had finally overflowed the cup, spilling over without splashes or drama. I expected pain, humiliation, rage, and they would undoubtedly come later. But now a strange calm enveloped me, as if I were watching this happen to another woman. Not to Vivian Carter, successful event planner, wife of Arthur Sinclair. It had all started an hour ago in the restaurant. On the second floor of the Eiffel Tower, my mother-in-law Irene Nicholson's 60th birthday, the gala I'd spent 6 months meticulously planning, pouring in not just my expertise, but a desperate hope to finally earn the approval of that icy woman. I'd booked business class flights for the whole family, chosen suites at the Ritz, curated a 7-course menu by a Michelin-starred chef, arranged a private Louvre tour with a Russian-speaking art historian, chartered a vintage yacht for a sane cruise, and the pièce de résistance, the anniversary dinner with panoramic views of Paris by night. The perfectionist in me had poured her soul into every detail, while the naive girl inside still believed this flawlessly executed celebration might melt her mother-in-law's frozen heart. I arrived at the restaurant slightly later than everyone, delayed finalizing the surprise, a quintet from the Grand Opera scheduled to perform Irene's favorite aria. The immaculately groomed maitre d' in his perfect tuxedo escorted me to the private dining room, but something felt off. My business-honed intuition screamed danger. Around the large round table, like actors on a stage, sat the main characters of my life for the past 5 years. My husband Arthur, his mother Irene Nicholson, resplendent in haute couture, his perpetually distracted father Bernard Sinclair, his picture-perfect sister Natalie with her husband Stephen, and Alina, Arthur's ex-fiancée, the one I'd only seen in old family albums and heard mentioned in Irene's rare, seemingly offhand remarks. Alina. Darling. The girl from their world. Impeccable pedigree. A grandmother bestowed apartment on the Upper East Side, a name that carried weight. She sat beside my husband, their shoulders touching. She wore an emerald dress that matched her eyes. Eyes the same piercing green as Arthur's. I remembered Irene always saying, "Imagine the beautiful children they'd have had, all with our family's eyes." My own ordinary brown eyes, inherited from a nurse in a community clinic, always earned her a look of perpetual condescension. Our family has only had green eyes for 4 generations, Vivian dear, a genetic signature. 6 place settings of gleaming silverware were arranged with geometric precision, exactly 6. No place for me, like I'd been erased from the script of this evening, this family, this life. I stopped, staring uncomprehendingly at Arthur. The restaurant was warm, but I broke into a cold sweat. Everyone fell silent, like actors waiting for the lead's entrance for the climax. Irene raised her champagne flute with a slight smile touching her lips. Natalie smirked faintly behind her napkin. Where do I sit? I asked, hating the tremor in my voice. Me, who'd survived the turbulent 90s, built a business from a cardboard box of business cards when event manager wasn't even a common term, suddenly felt afraid of these people. Arthur raised his eyebrows, his face a mask of feigned surprise, the same expression he used with people Irene deemed not our circle. Oh, Vivian, darling, he chuckled, turning to the others. No one actually invited you. Alina tittered coquettishly, covering her mouth with a perfectly manicured hand. Isn't that right, Mother? Irene sipped her champagne and nodded with the same expression of condescending superiority she'd worn when we first met at their Hamptons estate 5 years ago. This is a family celebration, Vivian dear. Her voice honeyed but laced with glass shards. You understand? 5 years of marriage, and I was still not family, an outsider. I'd heard the hints, the barbs, seen the looks 100 times, always believing I could prove myself, earn my place. The girl from Queens, raised in a prefab apartment building, who'd built a successful business from scratch in the wild 90s. I was used to earning things through hard work. Patience and hard work conquer all, my grandma used to say, kneading dough for pies in our tiny apartment. I'd believed that simple wisdom until I collided with the Sinclair's world, where bloodlines mattered more than sweat, where the weight of a surname, the pronunciation of a G, and knowing which fork to use for oysters trumped everything you'd built with your own hands. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Alina's slender hand brush Arthur's wrist. A ring glinted on her finger, the ring I'd seen in old engagement photos of Arthur and Alina taken a year before we met. We just needed a break, he'd explained once. Now it all made sense. A break. From me. I looked at Arthur. After 5 years, I still couldn't read his gaze, but now I saw something flicker. Fear, shame, relief. It didn't matter. In that second, I knew I didn't love him anymore. Maybe I never truly had, just indulged in a beautiful fairy tale. Prince Charming in a white Mercedes, my friend Lena used to joke. The prince turned out to be cardboard, the horse leased. Strangely, I felt not pain, but liberation. Like shedding a heavy backpack I'd carried uphill for 5 years. Perfect, darling. I smiled the same placating smile I used for difficult clients and turned towards the exit. Each step on the plush carpet felt lighter. Vivian! Arthur called out, and his voice held a note of alarm. Alarm! He always feared scandals and bad press. Reputation is everything, Irene constantly reminded him. I turned and spoke in the calmest tone I could muster. To work. I haven't forgotten about the anniversary. As a professional, I'll see it through to the end. The faces around the table froze for an instant. They'd expected hysterics, tears, a scene, proof of my commonness. But I was raised on Soviet school discipline and my mother's lessons. Never show weakness, especially to the enemy. Leaving the restaurant, I passed the maitre d', who gave me a questioning look. Descending to the first level, I sat on a bench and pulled out my phone. 20 minutes. Exactly how long I needed to cancel everything, absolutely everything I'd so painstakingly prepared. My hands didn't shake as I dialed my assistant Alex in New York. Alex, it's me. Remember Plan B, the one we joked about before the trip, in case mother-in-law finally pushed me over the edge? I gave a nervous laugh. Execute it, immediately. And yes, initiate all deposit refunds to my personal accounts. Every last cent. I hailed a cab outside the tower and gave the hotel address. As we pulled away, I closed my eyes. One phrase pulsed in my head. Perfect, darling. Absolutely perfect. As my grandma used to say, don't dig a pit for others. You'll fall in yourself. And also, revenge is a dish best served cold. I was always a good student. 5 years ago, I'd never have imagined sitting in a Parisian taxi, orchestrating the destruction of my own mother-in-law's anniversary celebration. Back then, in 2017, all I had was my company Perfect Occasion and a rented studio in Queens, and the self-belief my mother, a high school English teacher, had instilled in me. We'd weathered the Soviet collapse, the crazy 90s, even the 98 default when my father left for a young accountant from his factory. Viv, you understand, it's love. Things with your mom had cooled long ago. Mom didn't break. A real woman stands on her own 2 feet, she'd say, grading papers late into the night, tutoring on the side. I took that to heart. Maybe that's why I wasn't afraid to start my business in '99, when former gangsters became businessmen and former engineers became shuttle traders or cab drivers. With one promotional flyer and a notebook of ideas, I pitched to corporate offices. Want a memorable New Year's party? I'll make it unforgettable. My first clients came through talent and sheer grit. Word of mouth did the rest. I organized birthdays for nouveau riche kids, weddings for new Russians' daughters, corporate events for companies that survived the default. My specialty was the personal touch. No templates, just meticulous attention to detail. By 35, I had my own firm, an office near Times Square, and a team of 15. I was known and respected in New York. I organized events for major businessmen and even a few Russian celebrities. Personal life? There simply wasn't time. Brief romances ended the same way. Vivian, you're too independent. A man feels useless beside you. Then came the opening of the boutique hotel Alexander on the Upper East Side. The owner was Bernard Sinclair, a prominent businessman. Viv, you must land this contract. My deputy, Margaret Stevens, a former Columbia Cultural Studies chair, urged me. With connections like this, we'll reach a whole new level. I won the contract against 5 competitors. 3 sleepless weeks later, the opening was such a success it made all the society pages. It was there, amidst Dom Perignon and oysters, that I met the oligarch's son, Arthur Sinclair. He approached me as I was checking the dessert service, a custom millefeuille with sea buckthorn cream. I see you're the type who oversees every detail, he asked with a smile, adjusting the cufflinks on his impeccable shirt. In my line of work, details are everything, I replied, momentarily distracted from the waiter. You know, my mother would agree. He laughed. She also believes the devil is in the details, and rightly so. I smiled back, noting his green eyes, the slight bump on his aquiline nose, the dimple in his right cheek. Thoroughbred, my grandma would have said. A week later, he called me himself, having gotten my number from his father. Vivian, dinner tonight. His voice held that particular nonchalant charm you're born with, not taught. Can't tonight. Got an event? I answered honestly. Tomorrow? Tomorrow too. Perhaps you could suggest a window in your busy schedule? His tone held gentle mockery, almost affectionate, and suddenly I felt like I was in an old movie, like music swelled behind me, making the world kinder. On Thursday at 7, he chose Cafe Pushkin. Then came more dinners, theatre, a gallery opening. Arthur turned out to be intelligent, well-read, with a great sense of humour. He ran the investment arm of the family business, but as I later realised, mostly as a figurehead. Real decisions came from Bernard. Dad thinks I'm not ruthless enough for business, he confessed one night after a bottle of red. Maybe he's right. I prefer art, travel, life, And I thought I understood. Your parents? What do they do? He asked that same evening. Mum teaches high school English. Dad was an engineer at Consolidated Steel, but we don't speak now. Really, true Soviet intelligentsia. He said it with genuine admiration, and I melted. For the first time in years, I didn't have to apologize for my roots. 3 months later, Arthur invited me to a family dinner at their Hamptons estate. The mansion resembled an English manor. Columns, immaculate lawns, even a swan lake. I didn't know I was entering the lion's den. Irene met me in a pearl grey Chanel suit. Diamond earrings and a matching bracelet sparkled with every move. Tall, slender, with perfect posture and a frozen smile, she scanned me head to toe. Vivian, how lovely you could come. Arthur's told us so much. I felt the sting. Vivian, not Viv. Diminutive, like I was a child or the help. Bernard was simpler. A firm handshake, an assessing gaze. Heard about your company. They say it's the best in the city. We try, I replied modestly. Dinner was tense. I felt Irene studying my every move, every word. Vivian dear, which fork do you use for fish? She asked casually at one point. Thankfully, I'd mastered etiquette early in my career. Working with elites demanded it. After dessert, Arthur went out to smoke with his father, leaving me alone with my future mother-in-law. Vivian, she said, dropping the diminutive for the first time, you're a smart woman. Why do you want my son? Excuse me, I nearly choked on my tea. Arthur's a sweet boy, but weak, she continued. Always has been. Hid behind my skirts as a child, behind his father's back as a teen, behind our money now. He won't be your rock. I love him, I replied, shocked by her bluntness. Love, she smirked. In my day, girls of your background didn't dare fall in love with boys from families like ours. In your day, I couldn't resist. We grew up under the same system, Irene, the Soviet Union. Her eyes narrowed. You're mistaken, dear. Even under the Soviets, some lived differently. My father held a certain post in a certain ministry. She gave me a meaningful look. We never stood in line for sausage like some. It was a declaration of war, though I didn't fully grasp it then. I saw a woman from another world. A world of closed distribution centres, special rations, and chauffeured Volgas. A world where people like my mother and I had no place. What are you two discussing? Arthur returned, draping an arm around my shoulders. Our shared Soviet past, darling. Irene slipped her gracious hostess mask back on. Fascinating, isn't it? 2 months later, Arthur proposed. A 3-carat diamond sparkled on my finger, drawing gasps from friends and colleagues. Are you sure? Mum asked when I showed her the ring. Their world. It's different, Vivi. Arthur's not like them, I protested hotly. He's different. Mom just shook her head and stayed silent. The wedding was lavish. 300 guests at the plaza. I organised it myself, refusing a wedding planner. This was my chance to prove my worth to the Sinclairs. Irene watched my efforts with condescension, occasionally correcting my plans. Vivian: Dear, in our circle we don't invite the press. Vivian, those flowers are too common. Vivian, the menu needs approval from a French consultant. My mom sat in a corner, modest and a little lost in her new Bloomingdale's dress. We invited none of my relatives, only my 2 closest friends, versus 200 of the groom's guests. It's for the best, Arthur convinced me. Otherwise, they'll feel awkward among our people. I didn't argue. Head over heels in love, in a stunning Vera Wang gown, I believed a new happy chapter was beginning. How wrong I was. 6 months after the wedding, my life felt like an endless battle for acceptance. Irene, with aristocratic persistence, continued my manners education. Bernard mostly ignored my existence. Natalie never missed a chance to remind me of my origins. Vivian, those shoes are too flashy for you. Vivian, your laugh is too loud. Arthur didn't notice, or pretended not to. They just need time to get used to you, kitten, he'd say when I tried to discuss his family's behavior. Then he'd kiss me, give expensive gifts, and I'd believe things would improve. Now, sitting in that Parisian taxi, I realized I'd never been the naive girl. I just desperately wanted to believe the fairy tale, a fairy tale that had vanished without a trace. My agency thrived even after marriage. I refused to be a kept woman, as Irene hinted. Arthur, darling, why must your wife work? It looks like you can't provide. But my business gave me not just financial independence, but a sense of self-worth sorely lacking in my new life. The Sinclairs lived in a closed world I was admitted to reluctantly, only on holidays. Family dinners every Thursday where I felt like an intruder, meetings with important people at the country club where I was introduced as Arthur's wife, Vivian. Cocktail parties where I stood for hours, champagne flute in hand, with nothing to say to the polished women discussing their husbands' latest yachts or Hampton's renovations. You work too much, Arthur often said. Mother worries you don't focus enough on family duties. Family duties. I nearly choked on my coffee. Such as, well, you know, he waved vaguely, maintaining the home, the atmosphere. We lived in a stunning penthouse on Fifth Avenue, beyond my wildest dreams. But it wasn't my home. Every piece was chosen by a designer Irene hired. I suggested moving, buying our own place, but Arthur always demurred. Best views of Central Park here, he'd say. Besides, it's a gift from my parents. I knew he just didn't want to leave his mother's shadow. She controlled him even from a distance. The worst came when children were discussed. A year after the wedding, Irene launched a systematic campaign. Vivian, dear, she said at a family dinner, you're 36. Time to think about children. It gets harder after 35. Arthur and I aren't ready yet, I replied. My business is at a crucial stage. Business? She arched a perfect eyebrow. Women in our family don't work, Vivian dear. They focus on children and husbands. I glanced at Natalie across the table. She truly didn't work. Instead, she did charity and tennis, raising 2 kids with the help of 3 nannies and a governess. We have different views on life, Irene, I smiled. Women in my family always worked. Yes, I know, she smiled back. Your mother is a teacher, I believe. A very worthy profession. That very worthy, with its pause, cost me sleepless nights. I couldn't explain my hurt to Arthur. Relax, kitten, he'd say, flipping channels on the massive TV. Mother's just a bit old-fashioned. She's from a different generation. But I knew it wasn't the generation. Irene was highly educated, spoke 3 languages, knew modern art. I simply had no place in her world. Time passed, and I buried myself in work. My agency landed bigger contracts. I flew to international conferences. Arthur and I saw less of each other. He spent more time at his father's office, often returning late smelling of cigarettes and expensive women's perfume. I stayed silent, avoiding scenes. All my friends envied my marriage. Beautiful home, expensive jewelry, trips to St. Bart's and Aspen. "You hit the jackpot, Viv," Lena, my childhood friend, would say. She didn't understand that a gilded cage is still a cage. 3 years ago, I noticed Arthur becoming distant. He'd stare out the window for hours, swirling whiskey. We used to talk, argue, laugh. Now he seemed in another dimension. "What's wrong?" I asked one evening when he declined the dinner I'd cooked, having sent the chef home for the 3rd time that week. "Nothing," he shrugged. "Just tired." "Arthur, this isn't tiredness. It's something else." He sighed and finally looked at me. Really looked for the first time in ages. "My father is sick, Vivian. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. I was stunned. Bernard always seemed indestructible. Why didn't you tell me? We didn't want anyone outside the family to know. Only family. Only family." Those words again. I didn't know what to say. "I'm so sorry," I managed. "Can I help?" Arthur shook his head. "Mother's handling it. Best doctors, a clinic in Switzerland, but the prognosis isn't good." I hugged him, and for the first time in months, he didn't pull away. That night, we were close again, like newlyweds. I thought grief might bond us, make us a real family. I was wrong. Bernard died 3 months later. The funeral was private, for immediate family only. I stood beside Arthur but felt like a ghost. The widow. Irene held herself with stoic dignity, as befitted the old guard, not a tear in public. After the funeral, everything changed. Arthur became the nominal head of the family business, bearing immense responsibility. Irene, despite her widow status, had no intention of stepping back. She spent hours in the study with her son, discussing strategy. I tried to support my husband but hit a wall of silence. He came home late, travelled often, and on rare weekends home was irritable and withdrawn. "Maybe we need a break," I suggested. "Go away somewhere, just us." "Not the time for breaks, Vivian," he snapped. "Got a business to keep afloat." I watched him slowly turn into a replica of his father, just as cold, just as hard, just as unreachable. It scared me most of all. We drifted further apart. I plunged into work, he into the business. We barely talked, travelled, or made love. We just coexisted, 2 strangers sharing an address. Then it happened, 3 weeks before the Paris trip. I came home early. My team had just signed a major festival contract in Chicago. I was euphoric and wanted to share the news with Arthur, even if he'd shown little interest lately. At home, I heard his voice from the study. He was on the phone, his tone uncharacteristically animated. "Yes, baby, I miss you too," he was saying. The tenderness in his voice was a physical blow. "No, she doesn't know. Mom says we need to wait for the Paris trip. We'll settle it there." "You're sure about the baby? It's a big step." "Okay. Got it. Love you." I froze by the door, unable to move. Everything inside me shattered. I knew Arthur had drifted away. But an affair? And a baby? With whom? Why in Paris? I didn't storm in or demand answers. Instead, I quietly went to the bedroom, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, staring at the Manhattan skyline. I thought about what to do: make a scene, file for divorce, or pretend I hadn't heard. The next day I started watching Arthur. It was easy. We shared iCloud accounts. I could see his location. He spent hours at Cafe Pushkin, where we'd had our first date, sentimentality, or just a convenient meeting spot. I started checking his phone while he slept, messages from a contact A filled with innuendo. Meet same place, can't stop thinking about you. Everything changes soon. I couldn't find Arthur's replies. He must have deleted them. A week later, I took a desperate step. I asked my friend Misha, a computer whiz, to recover Arthur's deleted messages. Illegal, unethical. I needed the truth. Misha delivered. He sent a file, and I read it alone. In my office. After hours. My shock was absolute. A was Alina, Arthur's ex-fiancée. They'd rekindled their affair right after Bernard's death, nearly a year ago. Alina got pregnant 2 months ago, and Irene knew. Worse, she was pulling the strings. Mum says Vivian might cause a scandal if we announce the divorce in New York, one of Arthur's messages read. She suggests doing it in Paris at her anniversary. All our crowd will be there, and you can officially return to the family. We'll deal with Vivian once we're back. I read these lines, rage boiling inside me. They planned to humiliate me publicly, make a fool of me, abandon me in a foreign country. And all for what? So Arthur could return to his proper fiancée from their world, now carrying his child. The worst part of betrayal isn't the pain, it's having to pretend you don't know. I lived with a man plotting to destroy my life. Ate with him, watched TV with him, even slept beside him. In the weeks before Paris, we barely touched, and all the while I had to smile, discuss anniversary details, pretend I was excited about the trip. I'd long known my best mask was work. I planned Irene's anniversary like my life depended on it. In a way it did. Vivian, don't overexert yourself, Irene said when I showed her menu options. It's just a family affair. Family. The word she wielded like a weapon. It's your anniversary, Irene, I replied with a smile. It must be perfect. Something like respect flickered in her eyes, then vanished. As you wish, Vivian dear. You are the professional. Our professional, as if I were still part of their family, as if they weren't planning to discard me abroad. Arthur grew visibly nervous as the departure date neared. Twice I caught him whispering on the phone in the bathroom, water running full blast. 3 times he didn't come home, citing urgent business. I didn't ask questions. I had all the answers. Instead, I refined my plan. Alex, my deputy, an ex-military man turned event planner, once told me, "In business, Vivian, it's like war. Always have an exit strategy." Since then, I always had a plan B. What if it rains? What if double the guests show? What if the main course is late? This time, plan B was special. I arranged all anniversary payments through my personal card, not the company account. I signed all contracts with 24-hour cancellation clauses. I made copies of all documents, tickets, reservations, invoices, and stored them in a separate folder on my personal laptop, which never left my side. But most importantly, I rehearsed what I'd say and do when the moment of truth arrived. No tears, no hysterics, just cold, calculated revenge. The day before the flight to Paris, I saw my mom. We hadn't met in ages. She hated coming to the Fifth Avenue penthouse, feeling out of place. I rarely made it back to Queens. Mom met me in the apartment where I grew up. The tiny kitchen smelled of cabbage pies. Geraniums bloomed on the sill. Everything felt warm and familiar. "Something's wrong, Vivi?" she asked, pouring tea into Grandma's old china cups. Mom always sensed my mood. Why? I tried for nonchalance. Your eyes are sad. She patted my hand. I'm your mother. I see. And I broke. I told her everything. Arthur's affair, Alina's pregnancy, the Sinclairs' plan for public humiliation in Paris. Mom listened silently, squeezing my hand tighter. You're leaving him? She asked when I finished. Yes, I nodded. But first, I want to teach them a lesson. I told her my plan. Mum was silent for a long time, then sighed. You were always a fighter, Vivi, like your father. It was the highest praise from her. Whatever happens, she added, know this is your home. You can always come back. I hugged her, breathing in the familiar scent, chamomile shampoo and the Shalimar perfume she wore for special occasions. I know, Mom. Thanks. That night, back home, I called Alex and briefed him on Plan B, which was now Plan A. You sure about this, Vivian? He asked when I finished. This could hit the agency's rep. I've thought it through, Alex. Legally, we breach no contract. We're just altering the sequence of events. He paused, then said, They deserve it, Vivian. I'm with you. The next morning we flew to Paris. Arthur was tense but trying to hide it. Irene was her usual condescending, chilly self. Natalie and Stephen kept to themselves. I noticed them whispering, glancing my way. I smiled and did my job, checked arrivals, called guides, florists, managers. I was the perfect daughter-in-law and planner for the last time. Paris greeted us with grey skies and light rain. I'd always loved this city, its elegant beauty, its unhurried rhythm, its confidence in its own perfection. Now it seemed even more beautiful, perhaps because I knew this was my last trip with the Sinclairs. We checked into the Ritz. Irene and Arthur got suites overlooking Place Vendôme. Natalie and Stephen got slightly less opulent rooms facing the courtyard. I got a standard room overlooking the neighbouring building. Sorry, Kitten, the best rooms were taken, Arthur said as we dispersed. It's fine, I smiled. I'll be working most of the time anyway. The next day, the anniversary events began. A morning Louvre tour with a private guide, lunch at Le Grand Véfour, an afternoon stroll through Montmartre, dinner at a trendy bistro newly awarded its first Michelin star. I kept a slight distance throughout, the organizer, not a participant. I saw Arthur whispering with his mother, Natalie, shooting triumphant looks my way. I knew Alina was somewhere in Paris, ready to take my place, maybe even in this hotel. But I kept smiling and working, waiting for my moment. The anniversary's climax was the gala dinner at the Eiffel Tower. I'd personally chosen the restaurant Le Jules Verne for its panoramic views and impeccable cuisine. Booked the best table, curated a special menu, arranged for musicians. Everything had to be perfect. I spent the entire day confirming every detail. Called the restaurant, met the florist, finalized arrangements with the musicians. By 7 p.m., the start time, I felt slightly tired but resolute. I returned to the hotel to change. In the closet hung a black Alexander McQueen dress I'd bought for this night. Sleek, elegant, with an unusual back cutout. I put it on, applied subtle makeup, swept my hair into a simple chic bun. The mirror reflected a confident woman ready for the final act. Downstairs in the lobby, none of the Sinclairs were there. Strange. We'd agreed to meet at 7:30 to go to the restaurant together. I checked my phone. No messages. I decided to wait 10 minutes, then called Arthur. No answer. Called Natalie. Same. A bad feeling washed over me. Surely they hadn't left without me. Started the humiliation early. I signaled the concierge. Excuse me, have you seen the Sinclair family? They were supposed to meet me here. Yes, madame, he replied with impeccable courtesy. They departed approximately 20 minutes ago. They ordered a taxi to the Eiffel Tower. So they had. Without me. A lump rose in my throat, but I suppressed it. Not now. Stick to the plan. Please order me a taxi, I said. Also to the Eiffel Tower. 20 minutes later, I was ascending in the high-speed elevator to the restaurant level. My heart pounded, not from fear, but from resolve. I knew what awaited me, and I knew what I'd do. The door to Le Jules Verne opened silently. The luxurious dining room, with its panoramic windows showcasing evening Paris, buzzed with elegant Parisians and awed tourists. The maitre d' in his perfect tuxedo greeted me. "Good evening, madame. Do you have a reservation?" "I'm with the Sinclair party," I replied in French. "It's Mrs. Nicholson's anniversary celebration. I'm the event organizer." He checked his list and nodded. "Of course, follow me." I walked behind him between tables, enveloped by the hum of voices, the clink of glasses, soft music. Ahead, by the window with a view of the Arc de Triomphe, I saw them, my almost family. They sat at the large round table I'd booked 3 months prior. Irene at the head in exquisite navy blue, a strand of pearls at her neck. Arthur on her right, Natalie, and Stephen on her left, and another woman, that Alina. They hadn't noticed me yet, engrossed in conversation, immersed in their aristocratic bubble. Arthur finally looked up and saw me. His face changed. The slight smile vanished, replaced by nervousness. He leaned towards his mother and whispered. Irene turned and her gaze met mine. Cold, appraising, as always. I approached the table. Natalie and Stephen fell silent. Alina nervously smoothed a strand of hair. Only Irene remained unflappable. Where? Where do I sit? I asked, scanning the table though I knew the answer. Arthur exchanged a look with his mother, then feigned surprise. "Oh, Vivian, darling," he chuckled, turning slightly to the others. "No one actually invited you." The words hurt more than I'd expected. 5 years of marriage, 5 years trying to belong, ending with this phrase, delivered with false nonchalance. But I didn't show the pain. Instead, I smiled. Calmly, professionally, like I'd smiled at hundreds of difficult clients. "Perfect, darling," I said, and turned away. "Vivian," Arthur called as I stepped away from the table. "Where are you going?" Alarm tinged his voice. Not for me. For the scene I might cause, ruining their party, their precious reputation. I turned back. "To work. We have an anniversary to run. I haven't forgotten." I didn't wait for a reaction. Quick steps took me out of the restaurant, down to the first level, to a quiet corner near the souvenir shop. My hands trembled slightly as I pulled out my phone. I took a deep breath, forcing calm. Not the time for emotions. Time for action. First call. Alex. "Vivian? How did it go?" Concern laced his voice. "Exactly as predicted, Alex," I replied. "Execute the plan." "Already in motion," he answered. "I was waiting for your signal." "Excellent. Now, phase 2. I started dialing. First, the restaurant manager. "Monsieur Dupont, Vivian Carter, organizer for Mrs. Nicholson's anniversary. I'm afraid we have an unforeseen situation. The event is cancelled." "Yes, I understand it's unusual. Of course, we'll pay the penalty as per contract, but I must warn you, your restaurant will receive payment only after—" "No, not within 3 days as usual, but after bank confirmation." "Yes, I'm afraid it's necessary." Next call. The florist delivering orchids for dessert. "Madame Boucher?" Vivian from Perfect Occasion. "Regarding the Eiffel Tower order. I'm terribly sorry, but we must cancel." Then the musicians. then the hotel to cancel the post-anniversary breakfast. Each time I apologized, promised penalty payments, but stipulated funds would only be released after receiving new payment guarantees from the client. Since all contracts were in my name and payments routed through my accounts, I knew they couldn't resolve this quickly. 20 minutes later, I finished the calls. My phone began exploding with incoming calls. Arthur, Irene, even Natalie. I didn't answer, watching the missed calls pile up. 10, 15, 20. I caught a cab back to the hotel, went to my room, and started packing, methodically, like a robot. Document case, carry-on, laptop, ditto, clothes, suitcase, toiletries, travel bag. The McQueen dress I hung carefully in the closet. Let it be their souvenir. When everything was packed, I called reception. "Good evening. Mrs. Sinclair, room 342. I must depart urgently for business. Please order me a taxi to Charles de Gaulle and prepare my bill. I'll be down in 15 minutes. Hanging up, I looked around one last time. The room was as impersonal and cold as my life with the Sinclairs. I felt no regret, only a strange lightness. For the first time in years, I could breathe freely without the constant pressure of others' expectations. A sharp, insistent knock rattled the door. Arthur, only he pounded like that. "Vivian, open this door now. I know you're in there." I walked to the door but didn't open it. "What do you want, Arthur?" "What the hell did you do?" His voice shook with rage. "The restaurant says the banquet's cancelled, musicians aren't coming, even the food's off. What's going on?" "I think you should discuss that with your mother," I said calmly. "And Alina. By the way, congratulations on the baby." Silence hung behind the door. Then Arthur spoke again, quieter, pleading. "Vivian, listen. You've got this all wrong." "Nothing to discuss, Arthur," I cut him off firmly. "From now on, we communicate only through lawyers. I'm filing for divorce. And when you're back in New York, don't look for me on Fifth Avenue. I took only my things. The apartment's all yours. Move in with Alina." I pressed end before he could respond. The phone rang again instantly. I powered it off and placed it on the table. Mum looked at me with admiration. "You know," she said, "you reminded me just now of my mother. She never let anyone wipe their feet on her either. Even during the war, the hunger, even when Grandpa was arrested, she always stood tall." Tears pricked my eyes. "I miss Grandma. She'd understand. She'd be proud of you." Mum squeezed my shoulders. "Like I am." We sat embraced like that in the old Queen's kitchen as dawn broke outside. For the first time in a long time, I felt at home.